Hi, and welcome to The Brand Called You. It's a podcast and a video cast. We're talking to some of the most interesting thought leaders globally. Today's guest hit a chord with me. It's personal for me. I am the daughter of a Hungarian Holocaust survivor, and my mother survived, luckily, with her two sisters and mother, who in turn married Holocaust survivors. And so I grew up very unusually hearing those stories around the dinner table. But even though I thought I had heard all of the stories I needed to, there is an unheard story that I only learned about through our next guest, Rachel Stern. Rachel is the founding director, the CEO of the Fritz Ascher Society, organization for persecuted, ostracized, and banned art. Most of us don't realize that there were many, many artists during the Holocaust who were also persecuted, who were also in hiding. And Rachel has formed a fascinating organization that she's going to tell us about that is bringing those subjects to life. A bit about Rachel: she was born and educated in Germany. She worked for 10 years in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And in 2017, she was the recipient of the Hans and Leah Grundig Prize in recognition for her research about one of those artists named Fritz Ascher, also for her work touring his exhibit internationally, and the book that came out about him called The Expressionist Fritz Ascher. So I can't wait to talk to her. Rachel, welcome to the podcast. I think Fritz Ascher is a good place to start because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's really where your interest in these kinds of artists came about. Was it during graduate work that you chanced upon Fritz Ascher? Maybe you can tell us about the beginning.
Thank you so much, first of all, Lisa, for inviting me to be part of this podcast. And it's my honor to be part of it. And yeah, you're right. I mean, my discovery of Fritz Ascher was when I was still living in Germany. I'm born and educated in Germany, and I finished my studies of art history, and came upon Fritz Ascher's work. It was Fritz Ascher was born 1893 and died in 1970, and he actually had survived the Holocaust in hiding, the persecution by the Nazis in hiding. And I saw his late landscapes that he created after he came out of hiding in after 1945, and was taken just by the intensity and the beauty of the landscapes he created. And the collector who I met was very interested to have an exhibition put together about the artist. And so being the young art historian who in her mid-20s thinks she can move the world, I thought this should be possible, and went to museums, had a lot of conversations. Most of them I didn't even get the chance to have. And I found out that there was really no interest in Germany at that time, in the mid 80s, to talk about, and to show artists that were persecuted by the Nazis. So there was a big gap in my Fritz Ascher story, because I immigrated to the United States, and about in 2010, I revisited the things that had come across me and that I didn't finish the way I had envisioned to finish them. And I came across Fritz Ascher again. And I thought, of course, with a lot more experience, I thought there should be more interest today in showing his work. And I organized an exhibition here in the States, a very small exhibition in a shul, in a synagogue downtown New York City, when we came, but then many years nothing. So I went back to Germany the first time after many years of not going to Germany, in 2010, and spoke to museum directors and to curators, and found people being much more interested in organizing this exhibition. And so in 2014, I started the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art, because I realized in my travels that there's so many artists that are highly accomplished but not known at all. And I felt the strong urge to integrate them into the art historical telling, and also to tell their individual stories of what happened to them when the Nazis came to power, how they were persecuted, and how some of them fled, some of them built a new life, others terribly failed at it, and even others were killed by the Nazis. So, there's a very wide range of experiences. And in 2016, the Fritz Ascher exhibition opened in Germany and traveled through 6 museums in Germany. And then in 2019 came to New York City to the Gray Art Gallery, which is the museum that NYU has. And so there was, and since then we've continued with the Fritz Ascher exhibitions, but also diversified the work that we do.
And, I think your mandate is to ask some very profound questions. I think one of the questions you really ask is, how do artists with a particular set of of sensibilities respond to their own migration? This is fascinating to me in particular, because with the exception of maybe the Holocaust or that period of time, the war, I think we have more refugees now than ever. And I think it's creating a whole new aesthetic. Artists in migration, artists under duress, artists who are ripped from their homeland. And I guess I wondered if that's something that you're really interested in exploring as well in your work.
Actually, this is the most recent project that we're working on now, or the past half year really, is about identity, art, and migration, where we have found it very rewarding to look back at the history. And our work is always about the Nazi period in Germany, not only because I'm born there, but because, the reaction to authoritarian systems and regimes, you can look at that, looking at history in a much more profound way than discussing it in the presence. So, and of course, now today we have a much higher sensitivity to migration, as you said, because there are so many people migrating, and many more than ever. But actually the Nazi period, like the first half of the 20th century, is the time where the second largest numbers of people were migrating, because basically a whole of Europe was on the move, trying to find, trying to survive, or trying to find a better place to live. And during that time, or after that huge migration, basically the first reaction was just close your eyes, move on. This is your new situation. You make it work. You find work. You start a family, and we don't talk about it. But in the past years, we have really learned to understand how profound this change is. And I do think, looking at that change more deeply makes every single one of us who might have migrated or might have never had that experience more sensitive to all the people who do, or who did, and especially in the US, where basically everybody has immigration, his background, I think it's very important to be aware of the challenges that it means. And in our most recent project, Identity, Art, and Migration, we look at 7 artists and their migration experience. And they all fled the Nazis, were all persecuted by the Nazis, came to the US in different ways and created very different art. And we work about artists because with artists we have we have the art to look at, and we can see how the art changed, which themes were chosen by the artists, and we see how much they integrated into the new culture and how much they still stayed apart or were still others in the new culture. Because what we found out in working on this project is not really surprising, but became very clear that if you migrate from one culture to the next, part of the culture that you grew in, you're not able to shed that. And in immigrating into new cultural context, kind of it makes your adjustment in the new environment much harder to have that baggage of a different culture. And many of the immigrants stay even in their in communities that allows them to stay in the old culture. So you know, and of course the decision how much you integrate the old cultural context into your new identity is very personal and depend on all kinds of different on personality and all kinds of different things. But I mean, you I understand that had that experience yourself by moving to the Netherlands. So I
was just going to say to you that it was arguably the hardest thing I ever did, and not for obvious reasons, but the nuances of culture are so complex. But one surprising thing happened to me that I wanted to throw back at you. It was tremendously difficult, for example, as a storyteller for me, because I use a lot of expletives, and the Dutch wouldn't stand for me using words like great or fantastic. But there were a lot of very, very huge challenges for me, not feeling misunderstood. But there was one positive thing for me, which is I felt liberated from the responsibility of my own country. I felt like when I wasn't in a language that I really understood, that I didn't have to worry so much. I didn't have to vote. I didn't have to read the newspaper and get upset by the politics. And I just wonder if there's some interesting positive lining that happens with these artists you're studying, that if there's some strange liberation that maybe takes place creatively because they aren't in their own language and they're not burdened in some way. I know it sounds shallow, but I found that shallowness for a long time to be kind of helpful to me. I hate to admit it.
I think, as I said, you know, this is it's a highly personal decision. And you also have to remember that these migrants and immigrants didn't come because they chose the US. I think the US was the number one destination for people fleeing, you know, Europe in the first half of the 20th century. But still, if they would have had the choice, I think most of them would have stayed where they were. So this was not, they didn't leave by their own will, which you and I did. Because I also, as I said, have this immigration background, and from so that that's a big difference. But I do know from my perspective is that as an immigrant, I think you embrace the new culture more immigrants are known to be more patriotic than, non-immigrants, than, born Americans. And I can see that from my own reactions. With the artists, it's also this big change from coming from Europe, which is all the European cultures are very static, very history bound, very static. And you're coming to America, which is very dynamic. So it's a totally different environment. And in the artists that we studied, you see both. You see those who are happy to shed the static and are swimming like fish in the dynamic and in the new culture, soaking everything up in the new cultural environment. And there are others who are just not able to do that easily. But I think for all of the artists, you can say that it took a while to make that adjustment. It doesn't come overnight, definitely not.
I always think, you don't really know your own country, as you mentioned, till you leave it. That's when I understood the value of the optimism that, at least until recently, characterized American culture. Do you feel that America and its innately optimistic culture was in some ways helpful to these artists? Or I just wondered if there was anything to do with their healing or their progression, or maybe misunderstood as a result of it. I don't know.
I think so, definitely. And it's also certainly that European culture was known to Americans, especially on the East Coast, because so much of American culture is based on a European on the Europeans and European thinking. So I do think that made it a little bit easier than it would be for people coming from Asia, for example. And because but it is a big step to to learn the. For example, one of the artists that we looked at, Fritz Ascher, he decided one few years into his immigration, he decided, okay, I'm in America, my paintings have to be large. And he started to paint these huge canvases that he became pretty known for. And, so there are these reactions to the perception of what American culture is, which is very interesting. At the same time, to stay with Fritz Ascher, in the 50s or in the 60s, actually, he went back to Germany the first time ever since he had left, and stayed there for a few months, and that visit tremendously impacted his art. And so he created a body of work that was very distinctly different from what he did before. And even though, paintings that were very dark, black paintings, he called them, and very much influenced by Baroque architecture that fascinated him at the time. And once he finished that series and worked through that influence, his paintings were changed forever. So by looking at these artworks, we can see changes and adjustments that you can't really put into words that easily.
And I can't help but bring this up. COVID has been with us for 2 years now, and I can't help but feel the metaphor implicit that you're living with a threat of death. Really, we did for up until recently. You're insulated. You don't have much exposure to other people. For a lot of us in the arts, our funding was cut, and so forth. And I wonder if you also share do you draw some of those parallels to perhaps what some of the artists you studied were going through, and how that might be affecting artists today?
Yes and no, because I mean, you have to realize our lives were not threatened when we stayed home. We were very safe at home. And the only challenge that we really had was, how most of us had was how to occupy yourself meaningfully without for that time that it took until we knew what was safe to do and how to venture outside and all these things. So yes, there was a death threat, but we could do something about it. And so there's no comparison to what people went through. I did have to, having said that, I had to think about Fritz Ascher a lot, who had survived the persecution by the Nazis in hiding. He had a family friend who hid him in the basement of her building for 3 years. And, you say that and you write that, and, it kind of, it doesn't really, you don't really understand what that means until you are stuck home in a much less threatening situation, because he was sitting in this basement without flowing water, without, he received food only when the lady who took care of him was able to secure some food for him. And he was living in a neighborhood where he was surrounded by villas that had taken over by the Nazis. They had shipped off the Jews to the east and moved into the villas themselves. They were out in the streets with dogs looking for Jews. They and I'm sure he heard all these noises of the marching, of the of the dogs looking for him. He knew he couldn't go out. The lady was actually hiding other Jews also, who all weren't able to just stay hidden in that basement and left for a walk and never came back. So he knew he couldn't leave that dark space and that refinement, that small space. And actually, as the war developed, there were all these bombings on Berlin. He was hiding in Berlin. So there were all these bombings. So he heard the planes. And then with the bombing approaching, everybody in the building had to go to the bombing a cellar to protect from the bombing. So he had to move even further into the cellar so he wouldn't be seen by the other people who lived in the building, who didn't know about him. So so he had this high alertness for danger for 3 years without a pause, not at night, not during the day, not an hour of relaxation. And so in a very, very little way, I was a little able to understand a little better what it means to be locked up in a way, to be confined, to have to find something meaningful to do. And I just I'm just very amazed that he didn't go crazy during this time. How can you stay? I don't even know whether he had liked to read during that time. Probably must have had some natural light somehow, because he wrote poems during that time and that sustained him. But imagine what mental discipline you need to survive 3 years of this. And we're complaining with,
to quote my mother, when I used to complain that there was no food in the house, she'd say, "It's not the camps," and that shut me right up. Was he able to paint during his confinement at all?
No, not at all. He wasn't able to get. I don't think it was possible because it was so dark in such a small space, and he wouldn't be able to have been able to put away the stuff without people noticing. But at the same time, he was also the Nazis right away in 1933 created a cultural institution, and only if you were a member of that Reichsamt, you were able to buy art materials, to have exhibitions, or to sell your art. So already in 1933, he was not, as a Jew, not able to join that organization. So he couldn't get to material. He couldn't get art materials to create his art.
I mean, what's so beautiful about your work is I believe he never really saw his success in his own life. Is that true?
He definitely didn't see that. No.
How did he die?
He died in 1970. Actually, he moved after 1945. He moved in with the lady who had helped him survive in hiding, because she had lost her son, and she took him as under her wings, and actually took care of him until his death. So they lived in Grunewald, which is an affluent neighborhood in Berlin, but the villa where they had an apartment was sold to investors and to developers, and slated for to be torn down. And so the old people had to move in 1969, the end of 1969. So with large difficulties, she was able to find a new apartment. She was 10 years older than he was, so it was quite at an age where she was really challenged to find a new apartment, to prepare that move. And but for Fritz Ascher to be in a new environment completely threw him back to the time of his hiding. He had a sudden onset of Parkinson, spent most of the time sitting in a corner, covering his eyes. He didn't recognize his caretaker of now many years anymore, and died soon after. So for him, it was really he didn't survive the move.
Yeah,
the new environment.
I guess my last question, since we're coming to the end, is more of a personal one, which is, I mean, what does it mean to you personally to bring these artists back to life, to really give them a voice where they didn't have one? I just wondered if it's deeply meaningful to you or how you feel about it.
Of course, it's very deeply meaningful. I mean, for two reasons, it's deeply meaningful. It's first of all, I want to tell their stories, and I think by telling their stories, I can, we can teach about the Holocaust, what happened in Germany, and about, we can look at personal decisions that you're confronted with if you live in a totalitarian system and regime. And so I think it's very relevant to think about these things because, on a personal level. And at the same time, I also, the same way that Hitler decided to erase people's lives and people's voices, looking at art history, he really achieved that for these artists, to really erase them. And I just want to do what I can to reverse that and to integrate these artists into art history and to help them being seen and getting the recognition that they deserve.
I can't thank you enough, Rachel. We're going to follow you, and of course there'll be a link to all you're doing when this posts, but I'm so excited for your work and I thank you for it. It means a lot to me too. And I wish you tremendous success as you move forward.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you. Okay, bye, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.